Chapter 3. Passing through the gates of the spaceport, I exchanged brief greetings with the guards before taking a final glance at the EGAM. The idea of disappearing down one of the streets crossed my mind, for it was not difficult to vanish on Coruscant if you knew how. And I did know, or at least I used to. What had Terra given me besides a taste of excitement and colour in the dry towns, only to snatch it away once more? If an Earthman was fortunate and cautious, he would last about a decade in intelligence. I had been granted 2 years more than my fair share. I still possessed enough knowledge to discard my Trantor identity like an old coat. I could search for Lyric, settle our blood feud, see Julie once more, but how could I do so as her husband's killer? There was no other way. The blood feud on Coruscant was a complex and dreadful ritual of the Code Duello, and I knew that sooner or later Lyric and I would cross paths, and one of us would end up dead. I cast one last glance at the dark, winding streets behind me before turning towards the blinding blue-white lights and the looming starship that awaited me. A white-clad steward took my fingerprint and led me to a small, coffin-like chamber. He brought me coffee and sandwiches, knowing that I had not eaten at the spaceport cafe. He then helped me into the skyhook and strapped me tightly into the acceleration cushions, adjusting the garrison belts until I was sore all over. A long needle was inserted into my arm, administering the narcotic that would keep me safely drowsy throughout the intense interstellar acceleration. Doors clanged and buzzers vibrated throughout the ship as men in the language of the spaceports tramped through the corridors. I understood only one word in 4, so I closed my eyes, not caring. At the end of this journey, there would be a new star, a new world, a new language, and a new life. I had spent my entire adult life on Coruscant, while Julie had been a mere child under the Red Star. But it was the memory of a pair of wide crimson eyes and black hair combed into ringlets like spun black glass that accompanied me into the bottomless pit of sleep. Suddenly someone was shaking me awake. "Come on, Drake! Wake up, man! Shake your boots!" My mouth tasted foul and felt stiff as I struggled to form words. "What happened? What do you want?" My eyes throbbed, and I saw 2 men in black leather bending over me. We were still inside gravity. "Get out of the skyhook! You're coming with us!" one of them ordered. "What?" Even through the layers of sedative, that got to me. Only a criminal, under interstellar law, could be removed from a passage-paid starship once he had formally checked in on board. I was legally, at this moment, on my planet of destination. "I haven't been charged," I protested weakly. "Did I say you had?" snapped one man. "Shut up, he's doped," the other said hurriedly. "Look, get up now and come with us. The coordinator will hold up blastoff if we don't get off in 3 minutes, and operations will scream. Come on, please." And so I stumbled along the lighted, empty corridor, swaying between the 2 men, realizing in a foggy haze that the crew must think I was a fugitive caught trying to leave the planet. The locks dilated, and a uniformed spaceman watched us, fussily regarding a chronometer. He fretted. "The dispatcher's office." "We're doing the best we can," the Space Force man interrupted. "Can you walk, Drake?" I managed to walk, though my feet were a little shaky on the ladders. The violet moonlight had deepened to mauve, and gusty winds spun tendrils of grit across my face. The Space Force men shepherded me, one on either side, to the gateway. "What the hell is all this? Is something wrong with my pass?" I demanded of the guard. He shook his head. "How would I know?" Magnuson had given the order, and I was not happy about it. "Believe me," I grumbled, "I will take it up with him." The guards exchanged glances. "Well," one said, "he's not under arrest, so we don't have to treat him like a criminal. Can you walk, Drake? You know where the Secret Service office is, right? Floor 38. The chief wants to see you and make it quick." I knew better than to ask questions. They didn't seem to know any more than I did. "Are they holding the ship for me? I'm supposed to be leaving on it," I asked. "Not that one," the guard replied, nodding towards the spaceport. I turned to see the ship disappear into the clouds. My anger grew as I realized that Magnuson had no right to pull me off a starship like a criminal. By the time I arrived at the Secret Service office, I was ready for a fight. The building was empty, and I had to wake up the elevator operator. As I rode up, my anger continued to rise. I wasn't working for Magnuson anymore. Who did he think he was, grabbing me off a ship like that? Magnusson's office was full of morning light and leftover yellow lights from the night before. He looked like he had slept in his uniform, and his desk was a mess. As usual, there were solidopic cubes of his children scattered around. Magnusson was playing with one of them when he spoke. "Sorry to pull you off the ship at the last minute, Race. There wasn't time to explain." I glared at him. "Seems like I can't even leave the planet without trouble. You gave me a hard time while I was here, but when I try to leave, what is this? I'm sick of being pushed around." Magnusson tried to calm me down. "Wait until you hear," he started. But then he looked at someone sitting in front of his desk. The person had their back to me, but then they turned around, and I couldn't believe my eyes. "Race! Race! Don't you know me?" the woman cried. I took a step forward, then another. She ran towards me, and I caught her in my arms. "Julie!" I exclaimed. "Oh, Race, I thought I would never see you again. It's been the only thing keeping me alive, knowing that I would see you." She sobbed and laughed, her face buried in my shoulder. I held her for a moment, then pulled back to look at her. For a moment, I forgot about the 6 years that had passed since I had seen my sister. As I gazed upon her, every emotion etched on Julie's face was crystal clear. She had been a beautiful girl, but now, after 6 years, her face had transformed into a thing of beauty. However, the tension in her shoulders and the horrors she had witnessed had taken their toll. She looked fragile and weak under the meager folds of her fur robe, a garment typical of Drytown women. Her wrists were shackled, and the tight, bejeweled bracelets were linked together by a long, thin chain of silvered gilt that jingled slightly as her hands dropped to her sides. "What's the matter, Julie? Where's Lyric?" I asked. She shuddered, and I could tell she was in shock. "He's gone, that's all I know. And oh, Race, he took Rindy with him." At first I thought she was crying, but then I realized her eyes were dry. She had long since run out of tears. Tenderly, I opened her clenched fingers and guided her back into the chair. She sat there like a doll, her hands falling limply to her sides, the chains clinking faintly. When I picked them up and placed them in her lap, she didn't move. I stood over her and demanded, "Who's Rindy?" She remained motionless. "My daughter, Race. Our little girl." Magnusson interjected, his voice harsh. "Well, Drake, should I have let you go?" "Don't be ridiculous," I snapped. "I was afraid you'd tell the poor kid she had to live with her mistakes," growled Magnusson. "You're capable of that." For the first time, Julie showed some life. "I was scared to come to you, Mac. You never wanted me to marry Lyric." "It's water under the bridge," Magnusson grunted. "And I have my own children to worry about, Miss Drake. Mrs. He stopped, realizing that in dry towns, using the wrong form of address could be a deadly insult, but Julie understood his dilemma. "You used to call me Julie, Mac? That will suffice." "You've changed," he said quietly. "Julie, then, tell Race everything." She turned to me. "I shouldn't have come for myself." I knew that Julie was proud, and she had always had the courage to face the consequences of her actions. When I first saw her, I knew this wasn't a simple case of a battered wife or an abandoned mother. I took a seat, watching her and listening. She began. "Mac, you made a mistake when you discharged Lyric from the service. He was the most loyal man you had on Coruscant." Magnusson was taken aback by her statement. He scowled and appeared uneasy, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. But when Julie fell silent, waiting for his response, he said, "Julie, he gave me no choice. I never understood how his mind worked. Do you have any idea how much his last deal cost the service? And have you seen your brother's face lately, Julie girl?" Julie raised her eyes slowly, and I saw her flinch. I knew precisely how she felt. For 3 long years, I kept my mirror covered, growing a messy beard to avoid facing myself while shaving. Julie whispered to me, "Lyric's scars are even worse than yours." "Well, that's some satisfaction," I replied, while Mac looked at us puzzled. "I still don't understand what it was all about," I added. "And you never will," I said for the 100th time. "Unless you've lived in the dry towns, you can't understand it. Let's not talk about it. Julie, why are you here? What about the kid?" "There's no way I can tell you the end without telling you the beginning," she said reasonably. "At first, Lyric worked as a trader in Shainsa." I wasn't surprised. The dry towns were the heart of Trantor trade on Coruscant, and it was through their cooperation that Terra existed here peacefully, on a planet that was only half human, or less. The people of the dry towns lived strangely, balancing between two worlds. They had made deals with the first Trantor ships, allowing the wedge of the Trantor Empire to enter, and yet they stood proud and apart. They were the only ones who had never succumbed to the Trantorizing that took over all Empire planets sooner or later. There were no trade cities in the dry towns. An Earthman who went there unprotected faced 1,000 deaths, each one worse than the last. Some said that the people of Shansa, Dylon, and Ardkaran had sold the rest of Coruscant to the Trantors to keep them away from their own door. Even Lyric, who had worked with Terra since he was a boy, had finally reached a point of decision and gone his own way. And it was not Terra's way. That's what Julie's saying now, I thought. He didn't like what Terra was doing on Coruscant. I'm not so sure I like it myself. Magnuson interrupted her again. Do you know what Coruscant was like when we arrived here? Have you seen the slave colony, the idiot's village? Your own brother went to Shansa and rooted out the lease. And Lyric helped him, Julie reminded him. Even after he left you, he tried to stay out of things. He could have told them a lot that would hurt you. After 10 years in intelligence, you know. I knew. It was one reason why, in the end, during that terrible explosion of violence that no normal Trantor mind could comprehend, I had tried to kill him. We both knew that after this, the planet could not hold the two of us. We could only live by dividing it unevenly. I had been given the slow death of the Trantor zone, and he had everything else. But he never told them anything, Julie exclaimed. I tell you, he was one of the most loyal. Mac grunted. Yeah, he's an angel. Go ahead. She didn't say anything immediately. Instead, she asked what sounded like an irrelevant question. Is it true what he told me? That the Empire has a standing offer of a reward for a working model of a matter transmitter? That offer has been standing for 300 years, Trantor reckoning. 1,000,000 credits cash. Was he really planning to invent one? I doubt it, but I think he heard rumors about it. He said with that kind of money, he could bargain the Trantors right out of Shansa. That's where it started. He began coming and going at odd times, but he never said any more about it. He wouldn't talk to me at all. When was all this? I asked. About 4 months ago. In other words, just about the time of the riots in Charon. She nodded. Yes, he was away in Charon when the ghost wind blew, and he came back with knife cuts in his thigh. I asked if he had been mixed up in the anti-Trantor rioting, but he wouldn't tell me. Race, I don't know anything about politics. I don't really care. But just about that time, the great house in Shansa changed hands. I'm sure Lyric had something to do with that. And then, Julie twisted her chained hands together in her lap, he tried to mix Rindy up in it. It was crazy, awful. He'd brought her some sort of non-human toy from one of the lowland towns, Charon, I think. It was a weird thing, scared me. But he'd sit Rindy down in the sunlight and have her look into it, and Rindy would gabble all sorts of nonsense about little men and birds and a toy maker. The chains about Julie's wrists clashed as she twisted her hands together. I stared somberly at the fetters. The chain, which was long, did not really hamper her movements much. Such chains were symbolic ornaments, and most Dry Town women went all their lives with fettered hands. But even after the years I'd spent in the Dry Towns, the sight still brought an uneasiness to my throat, a vague discomfort. We had a terrible fight over that, Julie went on. I was afraid of what it was doing to Rindy. I threw it out, and Rindy woke up and screamed. Julie checked herself and caught at vanishing self-control. But you don't want to hear about that. It was then I threatened to leave him and take Rindy. The next day... Suddenly the hysteria Julie had been forcing back broke free, and she rocked back and forth in her chair, shaken and strangled with sobs. He took Rindy! Oh, Race, he's crazy. I think he hates Rindy. Hey, Race, he smashed her toys. He took every toy the child had and broke them one by one, smashed them into powder, every toy the child had. Julie, please, Magnuson pleaded, shaken. If we're dealing with a maniac... I don't dare think he'd harm her. He warned me not to come here, or I'd never see her again. But if it meant war against Terra, I had to come. But Mac, please don't do anything against him, please. He's got my baby, he's got my little girl. Her voice failed, and she buried her face in her hands. Mac picked up the solidopic cube of his 5-year-old son and turned it between his pudgy fingers, saying unhappily, "Julie, we'll take every precaution. But can't you see, we've got to get him? If there's a question of a matter transmitter, or anything like that, in the hands of Terra's enemies, I could see that too." However, Julie's anguished face came between me and the picture of disaster. I clenched my fist around the chair arm, not surprised to see the fragile plastic buckle crack and split under my grip. If it had been Lyric's neck... "Mac, let me handle this. Julie, shall I find Rindy for you?" A hope was born in her ravaged face, and died while I looked. "Race, he'd kill you. Or have you killed?" "He'd try," I admitted. "The moment Lyric knew I was outside the Trantor zone, I'd walk with death. I had accepted the code during my years in Shainsa, but now I was an Earthman and felt only contempt. Can't you see? Once he knows I'm at large, that very code of his will force him to abandon any intrigue, whatever you call it, conspiracy, and come after me first. That way we do two things. We get him out of hiding, and we get him out of the conspiracy, if there is one." I looked at the shaking Julie, and something snapped. I stooped and lifted her, not gently, my hands biting her shoulders. "And I won't kill him, do you hear? He may wish I had. By the time I get through with him, I'll beat the living hell out of him. I'll cram my fists down his throat, but I'll settle it with him like an Earthman. I won't kill him. Hear me, Julie? Because that's the worst thing I could do to him, catch him and let him live afterward." Magnusson stepped toward me and pried my crushing hands off her arms. Julie rubbed the bruises mechanically, not knowing she was doing it. Mac said, "You can't do it, Drake. You wouldn't get as far as Dylon. You haven't been out of the zone in 6 years. Besides," his eyes rested full on my face, "I hate to say this, Race, but damn it, man, go and take a good look at yourself in a mirror. Do you think I'd ever have pulled you off the Secret Service otherwise? How in hell can you disguise yourself now?" "There are plenty of scarred men in the dry towns," I said. "Lyric will remember my scars, but I don't think anyone else would look twice." Magnusson walked to the window. His huge form bulked against the light, perceptibly darkening the office. He looked over the faraway panorama, the neat, bright trade city below, and the vast wilderness lying outside. I could almost hear the wheels grinding in his head. Finally he swung around. "Race, I've heard these rumors before, but you're the only man I could have sent to track them down, and I wouldn't send you out in cold blood to be killed. I won't now. Space Force will pick him up." I heard the harsh inward gasp of Julie's breath and said, "Damn it, no. The first move you make—" I couldn't finish. Rindy was in his hands, and when I knew Lyric, he hadn't been given to making idle threats. We all knew what Lyric might do if the Trantor law caught up with him. I suggested, "Let's keep Space Force out of it. Let it appear as a personal matter between Lyric and me, and let us settle it on those terms. Remember, he has the kid." Magnusson sighed. He picked up one of the cubes and stared into the clear plastic, where the 3-dimensional image of a 9-year-old girl looked out at him, smiling and innocent. His face was transparent as the plastic cube. "Mac acts tough, but he has 5 kids, and he is as soft as a dish of pudding when it comes to kids." "I know. Another thing, if we send out Space Force after all the riots, how many Trantors are on this planet? A few thousand, no more. What chance would we have if it turned into a full-scale rebellion? None at all, unless we wanted to order a massacre. Sure, we have bombs and disc guns and all that, but would we dare to use them? And where would we be after that? We're here to keep the pot from boiling over, to keep out of planetary incidents, not push them along to a point where bluff won't work. That's why we have to pick up Lyric before this gets out of hand." I suggested, "Give me a month. Then you can move in if you have to. Lyric can't do much against Terra in that time, and I might be able to keep Rindy out of it." Magnusson stared at me, hard-eyed. "If you do this against my advice, I won't be able to step in and pull you out of a jam later on, you know. And God help you if you start up the machines and can't stop them." I knew that. A month wasn't much. Coruscant is 40,000 miles in diameter, at least half unexplored, mountain and forest swarming with non-human and semi-human cities where Trantors had never been. Finding Lyric, or any one man, would be like picking out one star in the Andromeda Nebula. Not impossible. Not quite impossible. Mac's eyes wandered again to his child's face, deep in the transparent cube. He turned it in his hands. "Okay, Drake," he said slowly. "So we're all crazy. I'll be crazy too. Try it your way."